We're all good? Did you want to sit down with me? No. Well, thank you for everybody. Thanks for coming tonight to Wolf Coffee Roasters. It's creating coffee connections. This is our third very exciting installment. First one for this year. Last year, some of you may have already been here, and we had producers from Kenya and El Salvador. I'm really excited, and I'd like you all to meet Edwin Martinez from Guatemala. Edwin Martinez works and is the owner of ONYX Coffee out of Bellingham in Seattle, in Washington. But he's also owner of a farm down in Guatemala in a region called Tenango, and it is Finca Hermosa. Now, Edwin prides himself on the sustainability of producing coffee, but also connections and relationships within his community of the many coffee farmers that are down there. It is an intergenerational coffee farm that his father purchased, his grandfather purchased, and you'll hear a little bit about that tonight, and also the other stories that are involved within the regions of Guatemala. Later on, we'll be cupping some of those coffees, if you have any questions, just we'll probably lead them on to the end of the evening. But I'd just like, if we could all just give Edwin a round of applause and a welcome to...
Thank you.
It is his first trip to Australia, so...
It is. Yeah. It is, and it's absolutely amazing. Thank you so much, Joshua. Thank you, Peter, for everyone at Wolf. This is a privilege to be here. I've wanted to come here for many years, and this is an incredible trip. The only thing that's difficult for me is it's been my wife's dream to come here for many years as well, and I'm here without her. So I'm trying to have fun while trying not to have too much fun, which is difficult. But thank you so much for coming out. Just to give you a quick overview for what you can expect this evening, I'm going to tell a little bit about my story, and so we'll go through some information and share a little bit about really how I came to be where we are today. And I'll go through some pictures that they're some of my personal favorite pictures that are about 10 to 15 years old that capture a pivotal point in our story when I first began exporting our coffee. And then we'll do a little bit of Q&A. And then we've got 7 coffees here that'll give you an idea on some different regions, different processing methods, as well as examples of different relationships that we have with producers, because we work with some very small producers as well as some slightly larger producers. But first, I just want to take a couple minutes to get to know you a little bit. Who here is from Brisbane? Okay. Who works in coffee? Is there anyone here that doesn't drink coffee? It's okay. Okay, wow. You can leave right now. So who came from the furthest away? If everyone's from Brisbane, is anyone from a little bit out of town? Yes? From Indonesia, okay. There we go. Welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, well, we'll dive in. So ONYX is basically a name that we came up with. My wife came up with it because we started selling coffee from our farm, Finca Vista Hermosa. And after we started working with other farms, we were selling coffee from, let's say, farm Finca La Esperanza. And we would invoice it from Finca Vista Hermosa, which was a little bit confusing. It would be like a roaster invoicing coffee from another roaster. But we started as a farm. That's how we started. That's our story. And then we got into connecting producers to roasters. So what ONYX is simply connecting producers of the finest specialty coffees in Guatemala to quality-driven roasters around the world. Vista Hermosa is our farm. It's in northwest Guatemala. That means beautiful view. Finca means estate, so you've probably heard that a lot before. It's also a very generic term for a piece of land. So you could call this here a finca. And we do think it is a beautiful view. I'll show you the team here. we've kind of broken it down. At Vista Hermosa, primarily we have, let's see if that follows through. So that's my father, and this is Eliseo. He's the manager. This is my grandfather, Felipe. Mario is the field manager, and Silverio is one of the patio crew. Julio is my cousin, and he's also working with ONYX. And so that's just a quick overview of Vista Hermosa. This is our site with ONYX. You can find there's a bit more information there. Our team, really quick here, is this is split both in the United States and in Guatemala. And so it'll scroll through myself, and then Blake in the center there. He with Chris are both in Guatemala hosting some roasters right now. And then Loiret on the bottom left, she's been in export and logistics, and she's full-time in Guatemala. She's been doing export and logistics for 24 years, and so we're very excited to have her on board. Danae in the center there, she's managing our lab in Washington State, and she sends samples all over the world from there. So what we do is we get samples from Guatemala and we send direct, as well as consolidate them in Washington and do an extra step of QC there. And Ty is also doing some sales, lab work, QC. Julio on the bottom left, my cousin, he's hosting, driving. He does a lot of sample roasting in Guatemala. And the way that we sample roast is pretty challenging because we sample roast in a lot of different places in Guatemala because Guatemala is very spread out. And we do a lot of roasting closer to many of the farms. Raul Rodas, he's the newest hire. He's past World Barista Champion, and he has a cafe and a roastery. So we actually use his roastery as a cupping lab as well. So a couple of bullet points here I'll go through. 1957 is really where it all started for us. My grandfather bought a small piece of land, and this was called Michikoy. And he was pastoring a church, and my grandmother started sewing pants for 10 cents a piece. And she would get paid 10 cents for every pair that she would sew, and that's how they purchased their first plot of land. I was born in California. My parents came up so that I could be born there, and at 2 months of age went back to Guatemala. So I grew up in Guatemala for the first 12 years of my life, then moved to Miami, spent a few years there, went to California for a year, and I've been in Bellingham, Washington for the last 22 years now. In 1995, something interesting happened. Growing up, I would go to our farm and I would pick coffee, plant coffee, and I would play in the dirt, as kids do. And I felt very familiar with what coffee looks like on a farm, but really there's so much in between that and a cup. And so in 1995, I started an espresso cart, and I served probably the most disgusting espresso imaginable. And I didn't know any better. But for me, it was a big reward to be serving coffee, knowing what it looked like in the beginning. But I had a problem. The coffee that I was serving wasn't our coffee. So I had this dream of getting our coffee somehow and being a part of delivering it to the end consumer. We opened a cafe in 2004. We called it Cafe Huehue. As you can imagine, that was a challenging name. Huehue is short for Huehuetenango, but in Washington State, people have no idea what Huehuetenango is. So they thought it was a paint store because of hue, or maybe a Vietnamese restaurant, perhaps. And generally, people were confused, and they would come in and look around, and we developed a very, very loyal following, and we were roasting our own coffee to order. You could walk in and ask for a coffee, and it would be roasted on the spot. Crazy model, but we sold a lot of roasted coffee. In 2004, later that same year, we submitted our coffee to an auction called the Exceptional Cup. Is anyone here familiar with the Cup of Excellence? Okay, so this was Guatemala's effort after the Cup of Excellence was there for 1 year of trying to do it on their own, and they only did it 1 year. And we qualified, and it was a big honor because the local jury in Guatemala had previously given us an award and selected our coffee to represent Huehuetenango for the trade show. So if you were to go to MICE, for example, that was about a week and a half ago, Ana Café, the Guatemalan Coffee Producers Association, had a booth, and they have coffees from each region. And if you would have tried the coffee from Huehue at that time, whether it was in Japan or in the United States or here, wherever there was a trade show that Ana Café was present, it would have been our coffee that you would have tried because it was represented and acknowledged as one of the most characteristic of the region. So that to me was a big honor because it was recognized locally for being a high quality for the region. But we also placed in this auction. And who here follows the C market? Anyone? Okay, there's a few. So coffee is a commodity, and there's a marketplace. Fortunately, coffee is one of those things where the price in the market has very little to do with supply and demand. Drastic swings in supply and demand obviously will impact. If there's a freeze in Brazil, the price will go up. If there's a boost in production somewhere, then you'll see prices go down. If it's an exceptional boost in output. However, it's something that is impacted more by speculation, traders. So if perhaps other investments aren't as attractive, coffee is often a safe place where people will invest because it's very recession-proof. And when the economy is down, people spend less on a lot of things, but coffee is not one of them. So that to me is an interesting thing to keep a pulse on how that demand is very consistent over time. So we left our cafe, still running. It was a big risk. And we went down back to Guatemala, newlyweds, to get a license to export our own coffee. And that was a very challenging thing to do because we found out that you couldn't get a license through the association by simply filling out a piece of paper. I asked for it, they didn't have it, they produced it, and they said they needed to run it by the board to create and finish this document that really didn't exist yet. So in 2004, 2005, 2006, we ended up creating a book almost this thick with instructions on how a small producer can get their own license to export their own coffee. That later became a DVD, and now a producer can get online and get on their phone from up in the mountains and click through, and with the help, maybe with a little legal help, they can get their own license, which is a very positive thing. There are over 100,000 producers in Guatemala today. When I started the process, there were about 40,000. And today there's maybe 10, 11,000 licenses that exist for exporting coffee. I sent samples out. So what do I do next? So I got my license. It took 6 months, working every day, being bilingual, being extremely aggressive and persistent. And I can be pretty stubborn and persistent. And once we got it, I thought, okay, now we have to export the coffee. So I committed to my father to purchase enough to fill 1/3 of a container, and I offered to pay the price that we sold our coffee in the auction to a Japanese buyer, and that price was $1.65 a pound. The current C market is a little bit below that, and the current premium for the lowest quality Guatemalan coffees is going to be around 50 cents, and then that'll bump up to roughly $1, $1.50, and then you've got micro lots that then go above that. So it's a pretty low price, but at the time it was a good price. Costs have gone up a lot since then. So we sent samples. I was pretty excited that I got a lot of feedback. I went to trade shows, and Roaster said, "This is an excellent coffee. I would love to buy this coffee." So I brought the coffee up, and I said, "Okay, it's here," and no one bought it. I spent a year and all of the costs to move the coffee, and ended up selling it for 89 cents a pound. And I committed to pay $1.65. So that was my first year exporting coffee. Obviously not a success. Learned a lot from that and understood, okay, so roasters are actually buying further out, and they're making a commitment. People that are looking for quality, yes, some are buying spot, but it's very relationship-based, even back then. And I didn't know these roasters that said they loved my coffee and they wanted to buy it. So I need to develop some relationships. And then I think I have the year right. In 2006, Klaus, who later started with 3 others, the Coffee Collective, he won the World Barista Championship, and he was one of the people that I sent a sample to. I met with him in Portland at Stumptown, and it was a party, and it was just an interesting thing. We connected, and I still didn't know where our coffee was going to go. And he said, well, we're getting ready to start this company. It's going to be called the Coffee Collective. And so we were fortunate to be their first coffee that they launched with, and they still carry to this day. Since then, we have worked with a lot of different producers with our coffee and slowly connected with more producers and facilitating getting a good fit, really, based on size, volume, quality, personalities, risk tolerance, a lot of variables. So 2007, that was a 50-year anniversary for Vista Hermosa. 2008, I submitted our coffee to a World Cup tasting competition that happened to be in Copenhagen. And I wanted to compete in the United States, but it didn't exist. I wanted to compete in Guatemala, but it didn't exist. So I thought I would love to see these competitions come to fruition. And so I ended up representing the United States. My wife was going to represent the United States, and I was going to represent Guatemala, and she decided at the last minute she didn't want to. So I represented the United States, came in 7th in the world. I think like any competition, when you start early on, if you think about the Olympics, any competition really, when it's in its infancy, it's a little bit easier, I think, to do well. So after that, there's a program that's called a Q grader that my wife and I got involved in. And we were trying to have kids. I include this detail. It's a personal one, but it's our story. And we couldn't. The doctor told us that there was a less than 2% chance that we were going to have kids. So we decided that we were going to be Q instructors and travel. And we were going to primarily go to Colombia first. The Federation, I think, had allocated some funds, and we were both bilingual, so we were going to go and teach and certify Q graders. And then we had Liam, who's our first of 3 boys. So we didn't go down that track. We continued exporting coffee. We brought down a roaster from California, and we did some training for Dunkin' Donuts, McDonald's. There were 13 companies in Guatemala that we did barista training for. And among them, one of them was Raul Rodas, who later became a world barista champion. So it's a pretty short span of time there where the coffee quality scene in Guatemala on the retail side really evolved in a very interesting way, and it continues. The next one is a difficult one. Again, I'm including everything here. We had a manager that was killed on the farm. It's a very difficult place sometimes. We have cash. All payroll is paid with cash, and there's no bank accounts. Most people that are picking coffee don't have a bank account. And so if you think about your income, there's some interesting things with coffee that are very real and challenging factors that we have to wrestle with constantly. But think about your income. If you just think about what that is right now. I don't know where it comes from. You do. Imagine if you got paid only once or maybe 3 or 4 times in a year, and it was all within a 30 to 60-day period. Your entire income for the year within a 60-day period. And it came just in 4 days. So there's a lot of impacts for you personally to receive your annual income within a 60-day period. There's a lot of impacts economically. It's challenging for banks. A lot of banks go bankrupt because they can't handle, in our case, in Northwest Guatemala, this is a large percentage of the country where the entire payroll happens on just 4 days. Imagine if you're a bank manager and you know that's coming. There's a lot of challenges with that. So our coffee was quickly sold to roasters, and we found that our coffee was sold out. And we then were prompted to start working with other producers. I'll jump forward. So in 2009, the first full container that was not FVH. Anyone here familiar with Hario? Hario products, Hario. We had someone come on our farm that was grinding coffee, and I was pretty fascinated because it looked funny. That was the first thing. He was just sitting there on the steps doing this. And I said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "Well, I'm grinding my coffee, of course." I was like, I mean, there's no point. If you're producing this amazing fruit and doing all of these things to just, have it ground a long time ago and bring around a bag of ground coffee. So I want it fresh ground. That's interesting. And then he pulled out a V60. And then we're pouring water, and I'm watching the technique. And he explained to me with detail the value of the ceramic burrs. And I started to learn, this was so 8 years ago, how, the relevance of particle size and particle distribution. And so to this day, now I realize that there's a lot of weak links in coffee still. We're a very, very young industry compared to wine, with the grinder being one point. Even the best, most expensive grinders in the world still have a very wide spread of particle size, which means you can't actually brew coffee with precision with any ground coffee coming off any grinder out there, because you've got different sizes of ground coffee. And so I started to find a lot of these things, and I got intrigued with the retail aspect, and we started bringing Hario into North America. I had a crazy idea that it would take off, and it did, and we sold over $1 million in the first 18 months. It changed a lot of how coffee was served. In North America, there's a lot of filter coffee, and what I did is send it to some of the most influential coffee people in retail, and I wanted to see if they liked it, and they did. And so a lot of cafes started converting and pulling out all of their large batch brew equipment. And here you have 99% espresso and then maybe 1% filter. In North America, I don't know the exact percentages, but it's definitely more than 50% easily is filter coffee. And so to shift from having a batch brew to a cup was implying a lot of added labor, and there had to be a reason to do it. So 2010, ONYX Coffee was born. We came up with the name prior to that, but that's where we really started putting it out, because we started working with more and more farms, and we wanted to be able to have maximum traceability, transparency, and have a story that made sense. We opened a bar later that year. Black coffee only, no cream, no sugar, no espresso, only 3 seats. They're beautiful seats, but they're very uncomfortable, on purpose. There's no Wi-Fi. And I just did a survey on why people choose to go get coffee the places that they go, and how important is the coffee. And everyone would say that coffee was very important, but as I started digging deeper, I learned that really there's a lot of other things that are more important. So I wanted to open a place that did not have any of those things that were more important, so that all that was left was coffee. It was a fascinating experiment. We ran it for 8 years, and we just closed it in December. The largest reason why we've kept it open the last 3 or 4 years is because we're a green coffee company, and we connect farmers with roasters. So we use that as a tool to learn on how roasters wholesale. How do roasters do a good job of carrying value forward to their retail accounts and to consumers? Wanted to also connect with new roasters that would bring coffee, and they wanted it featured in the space. So it was a great venue for constantly receiving lots and lots of new samples from roasters, and we would follow up and offer them green samples, of course. The next year we had a big problem. I'm gonna show you a few slides here in a few minutes, and some of my favorite ones have to do with this. But fertilizer quadrupled, and this is 2011. We were using an organic fertilizer, and the cost quadrupled in 1 year. And we had already had very aggressive increases in cost, but that was just massive. So we attempted having our own sheep. And we don't know anything about sheep, and everyone around us said, there's no way that they're going to live here. It turns out sheep eat everything except coffee. Some of you may know about the legend of Kaldi, which I think is fascinating. But we had a lot of sheep, and they ate everything except coffee. So it helped with the weeding, a lot of positive things. We got our fertilizer, but it was very difficult to keep the sheep healthy. And we tried everything. We brought a lot of veterinarians from around Guatemala. We brought some from the United States. And we brought the shepherd that we bought the sheep from his own community and said, can you live here for a while and just, we're doing something wrong. We need help. We're coffee people. We don't know about sheep. And even that didn't work. So eventually we told the shepherd, why don't we buy sheep? We'll buy more sheep, and you take care of them where you live, where we know that it can be successful. And so all we do now is we go in a truck and just bring back a truckload of fertilizer. And the sheep, as they grow and they have more sheep and they'll slaughter sheep, they'll sell the wool, they keep all of that. It's really had an incredible impact globally. In Guatemala, we call it roya, which is rust. And it's an airborne fungus, and it attaches to a leaf. And it starts eating at the leaf. And as you know, with any plant, you need leaves in order to have photosynthesis. If you don't have photosynthesis, your plant's slowly going to die. So this spread very quickly. And it hit a couple of regions closer to Guatemala City. And we didn't see it in Huehue, so we thought we were safe. We're a little bit cooler. We do have some warm mountain air that comes in from Mexico, but generally we're a little bit cooler, and we often don't have the problems of pests. Up until leaf rust, we never used any herbicides, fungicides, or pesticides. And we had to really wrestle hard on how we were going to handle leaf rust. And the biggest way to combat is to really have a healthy plant, but you can't do it if people around you don't do it as well. Because the leaf rust itself is airborne, if you control it and your neighbor doesn't, it'll just come right back very quickly. So 2012, that's where our team started growing a little bit in the US. 2013, leaf rust made it into Huehue. It really hit us hard. We lost 90% of our crop. So from one year to the next, all we had was 10% of our green available to the roasters that we were working with. And that, truthfully, is probably what propelled us. We've had a lot of pains over the years. That was a big one. But that's what propelled us to start working with more producers, because we were short on our commitments with roasters. And we wanted to honor and value those relationships, but we just didn't have the product that we had committed to give them. We just didn't have it. So we started working with other producers. And since then, that's where the business has turned, and we facilitate connecting producers, co-ops in Guatemala with roasters around the world. We plant 10,000 plants a year now. A lot of them are replanting, things that we've pulled out. Our team continues to grow. We now have 20 new producer partnerships. I put including Cadejo. I mentioned that one. That's a coffee that will be on the table. It'll be coffee number 3. It's a beautiful farm in Antigua. I think it's probably the most beautiful dry mill in the country. I'm obviously a little bit biased, but it's gorgeous. It used to be a gunpowder factory, the second one in Central America. I asked, why is it the second one? That's a big question. They said, well, the first one blew up. But Antigua is the old capital of Guatemala. If you ever go to Guatemala, it's very likely that you'll go there. It's a beautiful city. Coffee blossom honey. If Joshua is kind enough, he might share a little taste. There's a lot of you. But brought a little jar, and we started getting into this. This is kind of like the sheep. So this provides another source of income for people, having bees on the farm. There's a lot of positive benefits. There's a lot of health benefits. All the honey that we capture is raw, and it's something that has allowed a lot of the communities that we're working with to look at a new source of revenue that makes what they're doing more economically sustainable. In 2015, I committed to buy 1 barrel. We're coffee exporters. We're coffee producers, not honey exporters. So that whole process that I went through to get a license for coffee, I had to start over. and I'm still working on it now. We weren't able to export 1 barrel that year, so I gave it back. I paid for it, and I just gave it back because I wanted him to believe in the project and continue moving forward. So I said, take it back and go ahead and sell it. A few years later, well, I'm jumping down to 2016, we brought up a container last year, and almost all of it is in jars. We packaged it in the United States in jars like what you'll see that Joshua has. Okay. So we just started a new project this year with Andres La Torre. They've been buying more and more coffee from us, and so we've sent through them coffee to Singapore, China, and here. And what we found is that he had an experiment that he wanted to try somewhere else, and he wanted to validate. And they ran it in Colombia, and I got a chance to cup some of the coffees, and I was intrigued. And he challenged some of my thinking. I've always felt very strongly that you cannot make coffee better. What I mean by that is once you pick it, because it's an agricultural product, if you pick it when it's ripe, that's the optimal point. If it's underripe or if it's overripe, it's going to taste like an under or overripe fruit. If you get a banana that's underripe and you let it ripen, it doesn't taste as good as picking a banana that's ripe. Sometimes the difference is minor, sometimes it's pretty significant. But I was of the opinion that you can't make coffee better. And so some of these experiments that we're running now are really about fermentation and having a true controlled fermentation, not just monitoring temperature over time and guiding, but actually inoculating yeast and selecting which bacteria is there and protecting it, enclosing it in a sterile environment. Our tanks, you'll see some pictures, they're big concrete tanks. The bacteria that we have is whatever just happens to be there, and that's normal. So with these experiments, they're enclosed, they're in tanks that are used for water, so they're sterile. And for the first time, we were just dumping coffee onto our patio because we're doing some naturally processed as well, and putting coffee in these tanks. So everyone on our farm was very curious to see that we're doing some things that are very different than what we've done in the past, just to learn. It's part of the process of constantly looking to innovate and see what value add can be there. And the objective of that is simply to get more compensation to producers while producing a higher quality that a roaster would pay whatever they would be willing to pay for, but to offer it for a lower price. So it's a great value for a roaster as well as a great value for a producer. And now, yeah, first time to Australia. I can't believe it's taken me this long. I wanted to come here years ago, but thank you very much to Peter and the Wolf Pack for really bringing me out here. This is, again, these pictures are about 10 to 12 years old, and this is just a little bit of, to give you insight into my life at that time, where I was learning the process of exporting our coffee. This is our farm. This is our patios at the time. That house is no longer there. We've knocked it down and built a beautiful warehouse for coffee in parchment. And our manager is a very skilled woodworker. And he said, you know, I've got all of my equipment in the city. Can I bring it here? And I thought, where do you want to put it? I said, well, we just built that big warehouse, and we don't need it all year. And right away, I was just torn, because if any of you know anything about working with wood, you know that there's varnish and stains, and they have a very intense smell, and we just don't want any of that near the coffee. And I thought, even if we put it in there and then take it out, I just didn't like the idea at all. But we valued the relationship with him so much. I said, okay, let's do it. And so this beautiful building that we built for parchment has never had coffee in it. It's an amazing woodworking space. And if you ever come and visit, you can see that. And the windows and the doors that we have are incredible. He's really one of the best in Weiwei. He decided he wanted to be close to his family, so he left the city, had a very successful business, and wanted to work where he grew up. And he actually grew up picking coffee on our farm. So he lives on our farm with his parents. And instead of that house there, we now have a nice big warehouse for coffee that has woodworking equipment in it. Nurseries, we're planting 10,000. There you see there's no coffee yet because it's just barely a little sprout. That's a few months later. Takes a lot of work at this stage. Constant watering. If it's really hot, you need to create some more shade. It needs to get enough sun, but it's just like a baby. You have to really give it a lot of extra attention. And these are our sheep. They were a lot of fun. That was the first time shearing. This is my dad with the little lamb. And this is the house where the sheep would go in and the floors had slats. And so we would collect the manure and shovel it out afterwards. And then we thought, what do we do? This is like raw, fresh sheep manure. So we mixed it with dirt, we tried making a tea, we did a lot of things and had varying levels of success. Some of these pictures, people think they're taken from a helicopter, but there's just nothing flat there. Nothing flat. This is a stumping. We do this when the tree looks like it's healthy enough, but it's probably going to be better off if the roots are really healthy, but the top is not. Stumping it will allow it to keep the benefit of a strong root system and a new sprout, and so you have a maturity that can be there overnight, and it's almost like it's on steroids naturally because it has all of these root system that as much as the leaves can trigger it, it's going to feed and grow strong, fast, and healthy. This is some of our patio crew. That is not what we want to see. But this is what we see at the end of harvest. And the reason is we don't want to leave fruit on the tree. If we leave fruit on the tree will continue trying to ripen that fruit. And if it's the last pick, if it's the last pass, and that's just a decision we have to make. Roasters want us to pick everything perfectly ripe all the time, but there's a lot of variables to consider in doing that. So just showing some of the contrasts from very, very ripe to some unripe. Harvest is a very exciting time. A lot of people. Everyone lines up. We pay them by volume. So that box there is going to measure volume, and that equates to 100 pounds of cherry. If the cherry is not all red, then they have to hand sort and pull out what's not red before, and then we pay differently based on the volume of the different qualities. That's our depulper. That's basically like a cheese grater wrapped around in the cylinder with a funnel, and the space in between is just big enough for the coffee to get through without the skin. So it catches the skin and it pulls it through and it separates it. And then it continues forward. And with this, we have all of the pulp going one way. We compost it, mix it with fertilizer, put it back onto the coffee skin on coffee. And then all of the seeds have fruit on them. Ironically, this to me is curious. You think about most fruits, you take the skin. A lot of fruits, you don't eat the skin. Some of them you do. A lot of fruits, you don't eat the seeds. Some of them you do. But always with fruit, anything that's between a seed and the skin, you eat. Like that's the fruit part of the fruit. Well, we do something with the skin. Later on, there's parchment. We do something with the parchment. The seed, obviously, that's exported, and that's what's roasted, and that's what you know as coffee. But we don't do anything with the fruit. We ferment it off, and it's gone. The fruit is actually very sweet. It's delicious. So it's something that for me has been a curiosity that if there's a way to capture that fruit flavor, that I think it could be commercialized and be another source of income for farms to actually have a product that is the fruit of the coffee. It's like a jelly. So this is what the pulp looks like in a pile. This is the fruit after it's fermented. So the fermentation just breaks the fruit down. And then once it goes through this canal, there's agitation, and that makes it so that gets separated from the bean. And so we thoroughly wash it, and then we put it on these patios that sometimes we play soccer on. We often play soccer on. That is a very rare scene on the top right. Actually, all of that. That's naturally processed coffee. But I want to point something out. If you look on the top left, you see that's very green. That's what all of that looked like. And a green coffee is going to taste very astringent. It's going to taste like grass. It's going to leave your tongue feeling like you rubbed sandpaper on it. It's rough, and it's not sweet. And so we have that there because at the end of harvest, we do pick what's left, and we sell that off. And so we call that bolita. And typically, when anyone sees that in Guatemala, it's not a quality coffee. It's an inferior coffee that's sold off, and every coffee has a home. And so that's all pure bolita. When we were picking a month and a half ago, ripe coffee and then putting it on a patio like this, a lot of the newer pickers thought we were crazy, just absolutely crazy. Coffee, we dry it primarily on patios. It's sun-dried, and we just turn it, and we want it to dry uniformly. We put it in bags, then we store it, and eventually take it down the mountain. The first year that we were exporting, we had to create a logo. We didn't have a logo. We weigh everything like that. It's my grandfather playing the harmonica, and Carlos on the left. That's my wife driving a truck. The cost of getting coffee from our farm down the road, 16 kilometers, and then about, let's see, from kilometer 256, can't be more than 50 kilometers, 65, 70 kilometers total. The cost to move that coffee, that stretch, is more expensive than getting it from the Pacific or the Atlantic ports to anywhere in the world. And this is why. This is how we have to get it off the mountain. The roads are not good. You can walk faster than you can drive on these roads sometimes. So my wife's making the logo, and we cut it out, and we just sprayed it onto the bags. That's what we did the first year. We don't do that anymore. That's coffee in the warehouse. I went in, my dad and my grandfather were standing there as the coffee came in, and we were there physically present. If one of the three of us or our manager, every second the coffee was in the warehouse until it finished going through the mill and it came out. So this is the dry mill. Dry mills are very large plants. A small dry mill will be the size of this building, and that would be a very small boutique mill. And the actual mill is only this machine here. And all that's doing is it's kind of like a grinder, and it's removing the parchment. But there's a lot of processing for size, moisture, sorting out rocks, color. That's what all this equipment does. So this is an electronic sorter. This is an old one. And if you look closely, you can see those beans there. The human eye can't see that. Right now you see those beans. If you were standing in front of the machine, you couldn't see what you see there because it's just moving very quickly. So a camera captures a moment. But the beans go down a chute, and they're red for color. And if they're outside of a certain space, if they're too blue or too red, then the bullet of air shoots and knocks it out of rotation. And they're fairly effective. So here it goes into a silo, and then they're put into bags, they're sewn up, and then from there they get loaded up into a container. So we loaded our first containers, I put the locks on, we leave at 2, 3 in the morning. We get an armed guard for the truck, an armed guard to go with me, and then another one to go separately, and we just caravan. And I don't tell anyone when we're leaving. I don't tell the truck driver, I don't tell the guards, I don't tell the warehouse. It just kind of keeps everyone uninformed for security reasons. That's changed a lot. It's gotten a lot better, but I had to learn and figure some of these things out, hearing about trucks getting stolen every week. And so knowing that, I was trying to take precautions in the most creative way that I could. Of course, we got a flat tire. I hired the trucking company that was known for never getting flat tires because they have good tires, and we got a flat tire. And there we are, just waiting at the side of the road. It's the last thing that I wanted to happen, to stop in some uncontrolled, unplanned place. And the guards are standing on the side. It's a great time to just take a leak on the side of the road. I was a little bit upset they were, not paying attention there. I went with the truck driver into the secured area. They're normally not allowed to go in there. Only the driver can go in. But I said, this is my coffee. I'm not leaving this coffee until the very last second. So we went in, and I got to see everything on how it's offloaded from the truck, stacked up like little pieces of Legos. and then onto the ship. And then I did the same thing on the other end in receiving it. This is the original port. This is the first port of export in Central America. It was by donkey and rail. And on the back side of this building here, there's some surf here. Guatemala has some decent surf, but it's not like Australia. That's the first port of export for coffee. It's still there today. Obviously not in use anymore. It's my dad with a pink shirt. That building in the back is really the organization that preceded the Coffee Producers Association. They regulated exports of coffee. It was kind of like the trading house. This is at Ana Café. So now the Coffee Producers Association, we've got over 100,000 producers, and everything is monitored. So everything that goes to the port, samples are pulled randomly, and they go here and they're evaluated for quality. Naturally processed coffees technically are illegal. We have one on the table. And the reason is it's just controlling branding. With a natural process, you can have a lot of outcomes. Some of them can be really interesting. A lot of them can be very funky. And so in order to protect the branding and preserve what's unique about Guatemalan coffees, it's generally not been allowed, but you see it a little bit here and there. The lab in Guatemala does a fantastic job. My wife and I went and we did a course there. It was really funny because we really went down the path of becoming Q graders and had taken classes in a number of other places. But the reason we did this is so that we could together develop our language of coffee descriptors in Spanish. This is the container in our old house in Washington. We unloaded it, and we don't have very much rugby in the United States. We do have some, but I went to a local university and got some American football players to help me unload, and they couldn't handle it. I think maybe some rugby players could. It's a little bit rougher, no padding. I went to a gym and asked for some people to help lift, bodybuilders. They couldn't handle it either. The people that were able to most help were farmers. People that grew up, milking cows, doing hard work at 4 in the morning, that also knew how to lift. So there, we're banging that container open, cutting off the locks. This is our new warehouse. We actually live here. This is a barn. Most of the time, these buildings are they're for horses and hay in Washington State. We have coffee and kids. I have 3 boys, and they play there, and we live upstairs. We don't warehouse very much coffee there anymore. We warehouse in 5 warehouses around North America, and then we just keep a small amount of coffee there. This is Easter week. I have a few just cultural pictures. This is happening right now all over Guatemala. All of the main roads are covered with pine and then dyed sawdust to create these, they call them carpets. It takes a lot of work. And then you have processions, and then they walk right over it and make a mess. But the country stops. Right now, there's nothing happening in any of the mills. It's a week of celebration, of ceremony, and it's a very special time. This here is a ruin in Huehuetenango. They claim there that this is where soccer started. And it's something where you have these circles, and it looks kind of like basketball. And the idea originally was that there was this rock, a pumice rock, so it's light, and you would only hit it with this here. You couldn't touch it with your hands. Well, obviously very quickly it would fall, and it became a foot game. And so then you had to kick it up into the circle, and so it was mostly a foot game. And then there's a lot of, if you go there, historians debate about whether it was the winning team or the losing team, but everyone does agree. One of the teams was killed, the entire team, and buried in the bleachers. So this is actually one of those sides there on the left. This was a long time ago. We don't do this anymore. These are Mayan ruins. So if you go to Antigua, you'll see Spanish ruins, which are hundreds of years old. These are much, much older. Guatemala has 23 dialects, and there's still a lot of the culture is preserved as with the languages. A lot of the clothing differentiates where people are from based on the colors. Lake Atitlan is one of the most beautiful lakes. It's surrounded by volcanoes. These are some pictures of just, this is a road that we have to get to go to our farm. And at one point it washed out, and it was almost a 100-meter drop from the end of the road. And so we had to wait several weeks for them to build another road to go around. And this was just about maybe 7 years ago, 8 years ago. I-5, I put that there because in the United States, the main road going along the coast is Interstate 5. If you stay on that, you can go all the way up through Canada, up to Alaska. You can go all the way down through Central, South America. This is I-5. This is the biggest highway going from North to South America. And we need to go on that road to get to our farm. That's the road right there. Like it's supposed to be going across. These are all different points too, all because of flooding. It's my wife and I, my grandparents, my parents. So my grandfather is 98, and he still walks a lot. He likes to get out. He likes to tease people. He says, when you're 98, I want you to remember me, that I'm walking around like this. He constantly tells people like that. He says, every time I tell someone, but they don't live to be 98, so they don't even get to see what I'm talking about. We often show pictures to the workers, and they love it. They have a good time. Just being able to see pictures both of, not just of themselves, but of you. I'm often not just taking bags of coffee, but I want to try and let them see, what these roasters look like, what the packaging looks like, what does it look like to have coffee stored in these bins. They're just fascinated with that. This is called a chuch. You light a fire inside, you let it burn until the smoke is gone and it's just coals, and then you put rocks on top, and then you get inside, and you have a metal pot with water, and you then cover it up with a piece of cloth of some sort, and you just sit there, and you sweat, and you sweat, and you sweat. And it's like a sauna, yes. And eventually you can put water on yourself and wash yourself off. But this is a common way of taking a shower, of bathing in a chuch. And they're very small. It's about this big. But I'll get in there with my kids, or sometimes when roasters come and they're fighting over a certain lot, I say, okay, tonight you're both going to go in there from different companies, and whoever comes out last gets their pick. This is how we cook. You're just lighting fire. That's a metal or a clay surface, and those are corn tortillas that are made by hand. This is one of the families we work with. Coffee number 2 is one of their coffees. We often do celebrations, and we'll bring food and serve people that are picking and working with us. We try and foster community. I've had a lot of good ideas that turned out weren't so good. I thought it would be great to do this every day. And later I learned that I was taking away their family time by bringing them together. They were together all day in the field, and they wanted their own independent family time. So the learning never ends. It never ends. People have big families. That's 2 families there. My grandfather was 1 out of 18 kids. So I'm meeting my dad's cousins, it seems, every year I'm meeting someone that I've never met before. People get married at a young age. They don't have any kids yet, but how old do you think they are? I'm just kidding, they're not married. But I would say that it's common for, at the age of 14, 15, 16, you're an adult, and so you start living like an adult in every sense. There, we're just giving them some gifts for the kids. My grandfather, he plays a lot of instruments. The accordion is one of them. So as remote as this is, we have a lot of fun there. Wanted to give you some images so you could get a little bit of an idea of just a snapshot of when I started bringing coffee up. And I guess we could turn that screen off, Tim. Wanted to open it up. Obviously, you can hear we're grinding some coffees. Were you about halfway done?
We're to our last cup of grinding.
To the last cup. Okay. So we'll transition here in a couple minutes, but I just want to open it up for a few questions right now. And if we continue with questions, we'll dive into the cupping, and then we can continue afterwards with some food and drink.
How important is education on the farms for the workers so that they're au fait with all these improvements and innovations you're making?
It's very important. Are you talking about education as far as agronomy goes, or?
Oh, I think overall, like in both areas.
Yes. So with agronomy, we have agronomists from the Producers Association that we pay in addition. They are supposed to come out fairly regularly, and we pay them more to come out more often. We also make our farm available for talks, and so we'll provide all the food, we'll provide assistance for people to get there. If people are coming from far away, we'll support them in any way they need so that producers from all over the mountains can come and listen to these talks. We have a lot of sharing of information with producers that, fortunately, that's a very positive thing, that people are constantly asking each other questions and sharing what works, what doesn't. When you plant coffee, a seed, it takes 7 years before you get a good fruit. So you can't afford to just learn on your own. You have to constantly depend on any and every resource that's out there. So, because I have my wife and 3 kids are in Washington, so we're based there, but I go down to Guatemala at least once or twice, sometimes 3 times a month between January and June, which is our harvest season, harvest and export. And then I try and take my whole family down for a good month, 6-week period. But with young kids, we're just learning to do life at different ages. It's sometimes easier than other years, but I'm there over 50% of the time from January to June. And then now with our growing team, like right now we're hosting 2 roasters and taking them to different farms up in the mountains. This is not the first time, but it's one of the first times. We've done it once before where we're hosting roasters without myself or my dad being there. It would be like if I said, hey, Peter, come and visit us, and then I'm not there, and my dad's not there. Well, now we have a team where we can actually do that and count on them being very well taken care of and just properly hosted. Yeah. It is a long way. My mom's parents, they retired and passed away in Bellingham. So what happened is they went to be with her as she was getting older, my grandmother, and I was in California going to school. I didn't want to take any more loans, so I was going to go home. And at that time, my parents were spending a year or 2 there just to be with my grandmother as she was getting older. So I plugged into the university, and then my parents left, and I never left. I love it now. I didn't like it so much at the time. It rains a lot, but I go to Guatemala a lot, so I get my fix of sun. But I met my wife there, and we have kids, and now we've convinced my parents and her parents to move there. So we're pretty committed to living there. Yeah. Yeah. So how important is the World Barista Championship for showcasing? I think there's a lot of strategic ways to get exposure, and that's definitely one of them, because people are looking for the most interesting and exciting things. And every year, people that are competing are looking for an edge to do better than whatever someone did last. I know that when Raul competed, and then I think from El Salvador, so there have been a couple producing countries that have had a champion. What they've produced has been very, very interesting because there's access to being able to go to the farm on another level. But ultimately, I think it's very, very positive because it increases the level of awareness and curiosity. I sometimes am a big fan of things that are positively disruptive. So in North America, I encourage roasters often to have 2 or 3 different coffees from the same farm. And you'll see that now with processing. That's the easiest way to differentiate. But what that does, it's more of an educational value. I don't know that it makes sense necessarily to build a business on that. You could, but it's more creating things that cause a little bit of confusion and curiosity, where someone wonders, out of all the countries in the world, why do you have, you've only got 3 coffees up there and they're all from the same country, from the same region, from the same farm? Why is that? Well, it's a fruit. It's because it's a fruit. And we're trying to showcase the terroir and or the processing in that fruit. So, could be the sheep, yeah. Are we ready to cup?
Yeah. All right, guys. Just quickly, as a show of hands, how many of you cupped before? Awesome. All right, great. So we're all just going to head up now. I just wanted to again give a big warm thank you to Edwin.
Thank you.
He's possibly one of the most knowledgeable about Guatemalan coffee that I've ever met. So I'm sure we've got plenty of other questions too. So please, it's fantastic. He has very close relationships with all these coffees. There's 2 coffees on there of his own, Finca Vista Hermosa as well. Please, if there are any questions, up on the table is also a great time to ask those questions. So we'll just transition over there now. We've got 3 tables. They're all the same sets on each table, so just want to spread out so we can each get a chance to smell the coffees. They've all been ground up, so you're welcome to just dive straight into the.
Can you help me move this table this way? Let's move the table this way.